Welcome to the introduction to Buddhism. We may want to ask ourselves from the start, what is this term Buddhism? Is it what I think it is or not? Put very simply, the Buddha defined it as seeing co-originating interrelationship as reality. That's hard to wrap our minds around. Few religions or worldviews are as complex and philosophical, in my humble opinion, than the Buddhist tradition among the widely known religions. The issue is often debated. Is Buddhism a religion or a philosophy? Well, the truth is we can kind of say philosophy is Greek rational religion. In which case Buddhism, since it denies the efficacy of a creator God, like most of those groups we call religious, and since it sees reason and experience as one of the principal means to truth as opposed to revelation, then we would call it a philosophy. But what a religion and a philosophy have in common is that they are both worldviews. Certainly no one can deny that Buddhism is a worldview, as is atheist communism or fundamentalist Islam or Christianity. So it's certainly a worldview, if not a religion with belief in a higher power like God. We can start off the bat by defining the tradition as the founder, the Buddha, defined it as the Dharma Vinaya, or the doctrine and the practice of the discipline of monks. Buddha himself did not plan on a global religion, but rather just a means of discipline and study for a small group of like-minded males we call monks, but he called them beggars, bhikshus, and beggaresses, bhikshunis. So Buddhism is a Western term from Bud, to know, named after the Buddha, but like so many Asian religions, the traditions aren't named after the founder like Christianity is. In fact, it's the only major worldview that is named after the founder. Ism means practice of or belief in, so Buddhism is the practice or belief in awakening or knowledge. And yet Dharma Vinaya points to something quite different. Of course, another synonym for Dharma Vinaya is the middle way. This was another term that the Buddha, whose full name is Siddhartha Gautama Shakya, Shakyamuni, the sage of the Shakya clan. So he defined it as the middle way between extremes of hedonism or asceticism, of self-love or self-loathing. And just as the Greeks and Chinese had a middle way, this one's a bit different and is considered to be that razor's edge, a famous concept in the Zen tradition. So I think it's helpful to look at a map. Where are we in the universe according to the Buddhist worldview? Our world is comprised, according to Buddhists, of many realms and worlds. 3 lower realms point to lower rebirths in the realm of ghosts, hell beings or animals. Those who didn't study enough become animals, we're told. And then 3 upper realms of human, demigod, and God. But unlike many religions or worldviews, Buddhism does not seek rebirth in those heavens, but rather awakening here on the earth as a human being. And why is that? It's because the human existence is considered to be in the middle between the gods and the hell beings. And it is here on this planet that we can attain awakening, waking up to reality, which is co-originating interrelationship. So in that sense, Buddhism is a form of humanism, but not a form of materialism or atheism. While Buddhism denies that one should pray to God or that gods have efficacy in our lives, they are a distraction. Nevertheless, the Buddhist tradition does not deny their existence. And if you notice at the center of our wheel of existence, the Bhava Chakra, are the three poisons that run the entire universe in the Buddhist worldview. The rooster symbolizes greed, the snake, hatred, and the pig, ignorance. So because of these three things, rather than an evil being, let's say like Satan or something, it is the obscurations of our own mind that cause all our troubles and all the troubles on our planet. So that world of the wheel of being is where we are now, in what's called the desire realm, but then Buddhist and other Indian traditions, it should be noted, also posit the existence of form realms, realms of pure form, and formless realms. And these can be entered through meditational practices. But beware, if you do it the wrong way, you could be caught in a formless realm for trillions of aeons. We can't really picture these formless realms. We can kind of picture the realm of deities, heavens, or hell realms, but the realm of limitless space or infinite consciousness, or the peak of cyclic existence, the last moment before a being becomes a Buddha, a fully awakened being. And we're told that above the old Vedic 33 heavens are at least 4 more. The Tushita, or comfort heaven, is the place from whence the Buddha emerged on our planet. So we're told, believe it or not. And it's also where the next Buddha, Maitreya, awaits rebirth to appear to humans as the future Buddha. Through the course of this series, we're going to look at all the major elements of Buddhist evolution through this vast stretch of Asian continent. It is quite amazing that one human being could change the course of an entire continent. But that is exactly what the awakened one, that person we call the Buddha, did to this continent. From the south, we'll see the Theravada flow to Southeast Asia, the more conservative elements, and we'll look at that specifically. And then up through the center of Asia, the great Mahayana revolution in Buddhism, in Buddhist practice as Mahayana and Tantric traditions emerge in Central Asia and spread to the east. As for the Buddha, there are a great many legendary writings about him. The Buddhacharita is the classic, written maybe 400 to 500 years after his death. It depicts a life in a grand palace. The Buddha was son of the most powerful king of the old regions. With the name Shakya, you can see his name marked here on our map. And in fact, most likely Shuddhodana, his father, was not a great and powerful emperor, but merely the tribal chieftain with the largest mud hut. So the Buddha was born by scientists of religion, what we call the Axial Age, a point in human history when pan-ethnic empires have emerged and figures who encompass vast cultures like Socrates, Confucius, the Buddha, the prophets of Israel, the Upanishadic thinkers, All of these emerge in a miraculous time frame in the middle of the first millennium before the Common Era, the time in which we find the Buddha. We're told the Buddha was born into the Kshatriya or warrior caste. This is important because his movement and that of the Jain tradition will both be founded by warrior caste members who oppose the priestly control of the Brahmins who sit at the top of the Hindu caste system. While we don't want to go too far in drawing shallow comparisons with Protestantism, to some extent Buddhism is a common person's rebellion against priestly control. It is a declaration of the equality of beings, male and female in his case, an opposition to slavery, and reliance on one's own experience rather than the determination of centuries of Brahman scholarly agreement in councils and the like. He is allegedly as powerful as Rama with shooting arrows and the like, but more than likely, he was a studious loner type fellow. The prophecy at his birth from the great sage Asita predicted he would be a universal monarch or a universal teacher. Not only was he a warrior, but we're told he was married and lived a dazzling life among the dancing ladies of his father's kingdom. Due to the prophecy, his father tried to hide suffering from the Buddha, hiding every mention of death, old age, or sickness until one day, we're told, according to the legends, the Hindu gods wanted the Buddha to awaken to the final truth of reality. And so they sent these images, the 4 sights, we're told, of an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and a monk to inspire the Buddha to take the path that would lead to his becoming a universal teacher. So upon seeing the fact of suffering and sorrow, the Buddha resolved he will find the answer, leaving behind the most beautiful woman in the world, according to tradition, Yashodhara, and his own son Rahula. And then one evening he left the palace with his companion Chanaka and cut off the top knot of hair that symbolized his priestly status and headed off to learn philosophy and wisdom from the best teachers he could find. So as we say, the Buddha does not occur in a vacuum. He's the recipient of centuries of Vedic and Upanishadic wisdom. He taught with some of the greatest Upanishadic thinkers, such as Arada Kalama, who taught that nothingness was the supreme goal, or Udraka Ramaputra. Neither perception nor non-perception is the ultimate truth. The Buddha thought the answer lies at a deeper level than that. Then we find himself in competition with the Jain tradition, one could say. Those Jains emphasize not harming the body to release the jiva within. And we're told the Buddha was one of the tops. You can see here a Greek depiction of the Buddha fasting almost to death. In fact, nearly about to pass out. A young lady offers him a bowl of rice gruel, and he survives and recovers and realizes that both the life of hedonism he'd lived as a priest and the life of an ascetic were not the middle way and were not the ultimate truth of the universe. And with that, he sat down to meditate until he had discovered the truth of ultimate reality. So we see here a depiction of the Buddha seated at the Bodhi tree, the tree which lives today, under which the Buddha attained his awakening and became the Buddha. According to the legends, death was so concerned that the Buddha would find a way out of death by showing humans how to avoid being reincarnated and thus born again and then dying again, that Mara sent his daughters discontent, delight, and craving to tempt the Buddha and withdraw him out of his meditation. When his 3 lovely daughters failed to distract the Buddha, then demon armies threw rocks and boulders and logs, all of which turned harmlessly into lotus flowers in a sphere of protection around the meditating Buddha, until in the 3rd watch of the evening, we're told, the whole earth quaked, trees bowed, animals spoke, and the Buddha became the Buddha and awakened to the ultimate reality of our universe. That is the story. Now, believe it or not, upon awakening, he was capable of many siddhis and riddhis, magical powers and accomplishments. Believe it or not, he could manifest himself in many places and many times, as this image depicts. He could read minds, believe it or not, or hear sounds from distant universes. These 6 super knowledges allowed him to remember all his past lives, believe it or not, and gave him psychic vision as well to see worlds invisible to normal human beings. And so in that way, he teaches a middle way between the sensual hedonism of his childhood and the asceticism of so many in India who seek to harm their body to release their life essence. So did the Buddha reveal a path of salvation, a way that his God could bring the believer to a glorious heaven? Absolutely not. The Buddha's goal was discontent with the world as it appears, discontent with the Matrix. Many ideas from that movie are powerfully present in Buddhism as well. So the Buddha is a scientist of the mind, the world's first psychologist is how I see it, a promulgator of a subconsciousness and of a path to pacifying mental turbulence in the human mind. And that is his principal goal. So with the Buddha, one will not find a savior. Indeed, this is one reason many of other traditions castigate him. He's just a human who died, and no Buddhist will deny that. But what he did teach was a path of self-reliance, to uncover the truth for ourselves. And unlike perhaps most other worldview thinkers, the Buddha doesn't stress listening to books he wrote, or sacred scriptures, or rumors once heard in society, or even the teachings of one's own teacher, or even the words of the Buddha himself. If in fact what he says doesn't jive with the hearer's experience and practice, it should be discarded. That was his view. So for the Buddha, the mind, our human mind, is number 1, and our intentions are also number 1. For the Jains who practice asceticism, accidentally killing a bug is still bad. For the Buddha, if it was unintentional and our minds were not fixated on the killing, it is karmically neutral. For the Hindus, if it's your caste duty to be born a warrior, it may well be part of your life requirement, your job, description to kill or harm other people. So again, the Buddha takes a middle way, ethically speaking. And that leads us to his fundamental discovery for the middle of the first millennium BCE, the fact that our consciousness makes up the world in which we live. The world is comprised of mind. Even if I think of this camera I'm looking at to make this movie, it's still a product of my mental image of it. And what it really is, I may never know. As he says, with our thoughts we make the world. There is no east or west or south or north or zenith or nadir, but we make them up in our minds. For example, there is the story of Kisa Gautami, and her son has died. And hearing that the Buddha is a famous spiritual teacher, she brings her dead baby to the Buddha to perhaps bring him back to life. Now, Shiva or Krishna of Hindu fame might well have brought her baby back to life. But the Buddha doesn't do these kinds of miracles, unlike Jesus of Nazareth as well. Instead, he tells her to bring a kernel from the first house she encounters in the village that have not experienced the kind of sorrow she has with the death of her child. And after traveling the entire village and hearing tale after tale of sorrow and sadness, she comes back to the Buddha with the realization that everyone suffers like this, and then asks to join his community of nuns, beggaresses, and learn to become at peace with this planet through the Buddha's own community. And thus again, the Buddha, being a psychologist mostly, brings her through the famed Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages of death and dying, from stability to immobilization, going through all the stages until he gets her to the state of acceptance of the death of her child. Among other elements of the Buddha's life, he is on record opposing slavery, unlike many other great heroes of worldviews. He also expressed his preference for democracies, admiring as he did the free tree republic. Socially, Buddhism was revolutionary. The Buddha's opposition to the caste system, and not only his, but different atheist materialists and Vardhamana Mahavira, the founder of the Jain tradition, agreed with that view. It was a time in India after the initial Indo-European invading Aryan dominance had collapsed and indigenous native Indian views start to surface, even views from the old Indus Valley civilization, as more pacifistic practices like yoga and meditation are on the ascendance. So the Buddha is part of that movement, an anti-caste thinker calling the caste system illusion. And thus his anti-classism will cause troubles for Buddhism wherever it goes on the planet. Another big feature of the Buddha's teaching that will cause trouble wherever it goes is his encouragement of women's practice. We're told that his stepmother, his mother had died in childbirth, in fact, his stepmother Prajapati came to him and said, "I've raised you, Buddha, Siddhartha, all these decades. I also want what you have, and women want this also." We're told initially the Buddha thought women prefer cooking and taking care of babies. But with her persistence, he agreed and allowed the creation of the beggaresses, the order of Buddhist nuns that will itself become an historical phenomenon to be reckoned with throughout Asia. So anti-classism, anti-slavery, and allowing a role for women beyond just secondary placement as part of the patriarchy. These are some of the Buddha's social gifts and insights to our planet. So the Buddha has his disciples, as do they all. You know, Confucius, Muhammad, Jesus, they all have followers. Among the Buddha's followers, some of them become known through history as having special abilities, such as Shariputra's vast intellect, Mahakashyapa's in-depth meditation to the point that he's considered the founder of the Zen tradition. Maudgalyayana will be seen as adept at psychic powers that will be important to the later emergence of the Tantric tradition. And Ananda, his cousin, was the one who remembered, we're told, everything the Buddha said that become part of Buddhist scriptures. So here then are the greatest hits, if you will, of the Buddha. Praticca Samutpada, co-originating interrelationship. We'll explain that a lot and how many different modifications and changes take place in that doctrine through the course of centuries. Just as Einstein had a theory of relativity based on physics, the Buddha has a theory of interrelativity based on consciousness. In all that, there is no self. Perhaps this is the most difficult of the Buddhist doctrines to understand, and we'll take a look at that just shortly. And it is this doctrine that will be so offensive to Hindu opponents through centuries and through later Christian and other opponents of Buddhism through the centuries. Then the Eightfold Path, which is the fourth element of the Four Noble Truths. So 8 different distinctions to be made about how to traverse the path to full awakening. These doctrines emerge into 3 main baskets of literature. In the old days before books, sutras were carried around in baskets. And there was the basket of discourses, things the Buddha said. The basket of Vinaya, or rules, things the Buddha and community decided should be rules for the monks to follow in their daily life. And finally, the most exciting, and where all the evolution rubber hits the road, we might say, is the Abhidharma basket, or super doctrine, or higher doctrine. This is where all the later philosophy and incredible creativity we'll see pouring out of the Buddhist tradition will all emerge from that third aspect of Buddhist literature. The Vinaya won't change too much. The sutras, well, the Mahayana will make things up, the Buddha said later. And the Theravada will preserve reasonably faithfully what the tradition had assembled in the first 2 centuries or so after the Buddha's death. So here is a doctrine of Praticca Samutpada, or co-originating interrelationship. This was all formulated subsequently in centuries following the Buddha's death, where the Buddha would refer at times to Namarupa, a human, as name and form, or Namarupa. And in different ways this was all assembled. So starting with ignorance, a human being is born with karmic conditioning already from a past life, let's say, and from the causes and conditions of this life, takes form in a womb. Contact with our world appears. After the 6th sense consciousness appear in an embryo, then contact with the world has taken place, and then the young being experiences sensations, craving and attachment that lead to rebirth and death after old age, and the cycle continues infinitely until awakening. So now let's take a closer look at the no-self doctrine. It is not nihilistic. It is not really that difficult even to understand if explained properly. While it sounds scary and nihilistic, even frightening to some who cling tightly to their self-conception and the ideas of souls, in fact, it's not so threatening nor so difficult to understand. The concept will evolve throughout Buddhist evolution throughout Asia. But the simple concept, the Buddha's Model T, we can say, is running something like this. This Chinese stick figure first got it into my head how these function. The 5 aggregates, they are called, are not simply co-equal aggregates. What is an aggregate? 4 elements that comprise human experience. So we can see in our diagram here, there is a form that is then sensed by a being. The being has a conception, and the conception leads to action. That action leads to new form, sensations, conceptions, actions, and so forth again and again. And all 4 of these take place under the framework of consciousness, which is not a self or permanent soul like the Hindus or Greeks, because that self or soul is always changing, and it's not different from this body I'm in right now. So let's look at how does this proceed, shall we? The material object of desire, you can see it there. For me personally, a cold beer on a hot day is an object of desire. As I'm drinking it, I get the delightful sensation, oh, this beer is delicious, and that's the conception I have. Stage 3. Then I'm ready to do something else. I'm ready to have another beer. And that may lead to another, and another, and another, until what was once pleasurable has become painful to me. And so I find that pleasure and pain are both to be abandoned for the Buddhist path. And so this shifting awareness is all called consciousness. And this fact leads to another, the 3 seals of Buddhism: anatman, or no self; anicca, or impermanence. There's nothing permanent about our universe. And finally, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, not sorrow or pain. Buddhism is often called an escapist, denialist rejection of our world, but in fact, it is only the acknowledgement that usual human life does not bring satisfaction, and there is a way out of dissatisfaction. The way out of this dissatisfaction lies in 3 main objectives: morality, or shila; prajna, panya in Pali, wisdom; and samadhi, or meditation. So the Buddhist worldview incorporates meditation into its very heart. It's been called half of all Buddhism. So as we're looking at dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, commonly mistranslated as suffering, it's more to be compared with, and was compared in the classic period, to a highway that's filled with potholes. You can travel that pothole-ridden road, but it's going to be bumpy, and it could be a lot smoother. And the arising of the unsatisfactoriness, samudaya, or emergence, the appearance, comes from desire. You want a better car, on a better road, and that desire leads to your unhappiness and discontent. It leads to a thirst that can even be severe addictions, gambling, or alcoholism, or drug abuse. But then there are many more. Too much television, junk food, idle gossip. There are a lot lower levels of addiction than just the commonly thought of ones that destroy human lives. The others are also distractions from reality. So again, there's unsatisfactoriness, the arising of that due to desire, the cessation of desire leads to the path to take you to that awakening, the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path has these 8 limbs, and among the things the Buddha thought were bad were drinking liquor, but also gossip or lying, poor bad speech. Sex was okay for the Buddha for a non-monk, as long as it took place with confidence both individuals had in each other. In other words, adultery or any kind of lying is bad news for the Buddha. Oddly enough, gay and transsexual people were allowed into his community, but once allowed in, of course, all kinds of sexual behavior should stop, but it didn't always. When that happened, the Buddha formulated rules for expelling monks who refused to conform to those reasonable rules only maintained to keep some peace and quiet in the community. But the lay persons who followed the Buddha were not required to do all those things, but only 5 precepts among these included not drinking alcohol. Wisdom, morality, and meditation then make up the 3 elements of this eightfold path. So wisdom involves the right view and the intention to attain awakening and help others along the way to do so. Morality involved a lot of basic morality that all axial age religions share: not killing, not lying, not stealing. And for the Buddha, idle gossip should be added in that mix. So then in the morality label there is proper action, which includes no killing. The Buddha was not a vegetarian, and to this day monks will eat whatever the layperson puts in their basket. But one should not kill an animal for a monk or for oneself. Then of course celibacy for monks, and not to mention the standard no-nos, the taboos of rape and murder and the like. Many might not agree with the Buddha that being a butcher or a policeman, for example, are unethical jobs. Well, it's not that society doesn't need these people, soldiers and the like. It's just that for a sincere Buddhist, those are the kind of livelihoods to avoid violence. And of course, dealing in intoxicants or the slave sex trade, all of these as well, are forbidden by Buddhist morality. So then the third and final category is concentration or meditation, samadhi. And diligence is required to attain these ever higher mental states, along with cultivating wholesome actions and avoiding unwholesome actions. Then in this category as well, mindfulness, being aware of one's surroundings, not just in terms of mental awareness as many think, but also body awareness and awareness of emotions. Being aware of your thoughts as they wander in and out of your mind is part of this mindfulness. And then, of course, the 2 elements of Buddhist meditation. There are many kinds, but Buddhist meditation focuses on stopping thoughts, shamatha, quiescence of thought and mental activity, combined with vipassana, or a deeper insight into awareness of no self, co-originating interrelationship. So meditation is then a cognitive restructuring, a remaking of our minds through vipassana, insight, awareness of emptiness and no self, and shamatha, stopping usual thoughts. thoughts. And then Buddhist meditation is also prescriptive. So different meditations for different afflictions are in order. For men particularly addicted to lust, for example, meditating on the rotting corpses of women's bodies in the charnel or funeral grounds might help one get over that affliction. Likewise, for everyone, viewing all other people as skeletons creates an awareness of equanimity. As one realizes there is no class or gender or religious or ethnic distinctions among skeletons. And so rather than watching movies with beautiful actresses, for the Buddha, it would be better to focus on the bile, the poop, the pee, the sinew, all the nasty stuff inside a human body, rather than the external appearances. So there's a reasonable, I think, overview of the life and thinking of Siddhartha Gautama Shakyamuni, the sage of the Sakya clan, who is more commonly known as the Buddha. And so, at age 80, he will die from some kind of food poisoning, it's thought, and then resting at his end, not unlike Socrates, a chance to speak with his disciples some final words. The Buddha urged them to let the Dharma, his teaching, and reality, his teaching about reality, be your guide after his death. And so his last words were, "O monks, all composite phenomena are prone to destruction." And therefore he too would be entering that final abode. And for a Buddha, that means nirvana. No more reincarnation for him. The goal of all Buddhists.